What if I told you that one of the wildest, most psychedelic songs on Sgt. Pepper's wasn't born out of drug-fueled visions? It actually came from John Lennon buying a dusty old circus poster while on his lunch break. That's right, a random Victorian poster showcasing tightrope walkers, trampoline leaps, and a horse named Xanthus turned into the song Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. A track so strange, so theatrical, and so unlike anything that they'd ever done, it made you feel like you just stumbled into a carnival inside John's brain.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline.
So, how did a poster from 1843 become one of the Beatles' most underrated gems? And a song Paul McCartney plays live to this day? Well, step right up, because this story is about to get delightfully bizarre. So let's rewind the tape. January the 31st, 1967, the Beatles are out in Sevenoaks, Kent, filming the music video / promo clip for Strawberry Fields Forever. Now, a Beatles filming day usually involves cool haircuts, smoking, maybe a little bit of drugs, cool clothes, and most importantly, long hours of standing around pretending to play music. But on this day, something magical happened on their lunch break. George Harrison later explained, "We had a lunch break and we went to an antique shop on the way to the restaurant. We were looking at what they had there and John pulled out this thing that we found, a little poster which are more or less the whole lyrics of the song Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite on it. I think he was just advanced in his awareness of putting everything in a song." John buys the poster, probably thinking that'll look great in my living room. He hangs it on the wall at his Kenwood home, and soon that poster becomes the direct blueprint for the song. Look, I'm not sure how my retention on this video would go if I just sat here and read out every little thing on the poster, so if you're interested, go give it a full read for yourself. I'll be here just to touch on the main things. Now, these people listed on the poster were real performers with colourful histories. Pablo Fanque had risen from circus star to become one of Britain's first black circus owners and was famed for his skill and his showmanship. Then there were John and Angus Henderson, a husband and wife duo who had dazzled audiences across Europe and Russia. John especially. He was a jack of all trades in the ring, working as a wire walker, trampolinist and a clown. And of course, William Kite himself, a circus man who had once performed with his family's Kite Pavilion Circus before joining Pablo Fanque's circus. The poster shows him upside down on a pole, balancing on his head while blowing a trumpet. Now, this wasn't just any poster, it was the kind of thing designed to whip 19th century Rochdale into a frenzy. And you can see all over it bold claims, exclamation marks, and promises that a splendid time is guaranteed for all. Of course, leave it to John Lennon to act like he dashed it off, no problem. He told Hunter Davies in 1968, "I wasn't very proud of that, there was no real work." But come on, who else could lift an 1840s circus advert, sprinkle in some sarcasm, and end up with a track that people still talk about 60 years later? "I wrote that as a pure poetic job," John Lennon explained, rather flippantly. "I had to write it because it was time to write, and I had to compose it quickly because otherwise I wouldn't have been on the album. So I had to knock off a few songs, so I knocked off A Day in the Life and Mr. Kite." Paul, meanwhile, remembers it differently. In his book, many years from now, he insists that it was more of a co-write. He says he was there in John's living room, helping glue the phrases together, adding in little lyrical bridges and trying to figure out what on earth a Somerset was. And like, one of the things that I love most about this channel and diving into these Beatles songs is finding out that some songs may be actually a bit more of a co-write than I first thought. We just sat down and wrote it. We pretty much took it down word for word and then just made up some little bits and pieces to glue it together. It was more John's because it was his poster, so he ended up singing it, but it was quite a coherent song. By the way, a somerset wasn't a holiday in the West Country. It's an old word for somersault. The poster also mentioned trampolines, but in those days, a trampoline meant a wooden springboard, not the big bouncy things that we've got in our gardens today. And a hogshead of real fire is literally a giant barrel filled with flames that acrobats would leap through. Could you actually imagine that? So the story goes that John and Paul sit down, stare at this poster, and start piecing together lyrics. And somewhere along the way, the celebrated horse Xanthus transforms into Henry the horse. Why Henry? Who knows? Maybe it just sounded better. Maybe John thought Henry was a funnier name. But later on, people decided that Henry the horse must be a code for heroin, but John swore it wasn't. Everything in the song is from that poster, John explained, except the horse wasn't called Henry. Now, there are all kinds of stories about Henry the horse being heroin. I had never seen heroin in that period. It's all just from that poster. Still, us Beatles fans do love hidden meaning, don't we? Well, the BBC weren't taking any risks, and it was one of the Sgt. Pepper's tracks that was banned for radio play, as well as A Day in the Life and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. But was John actually putting any deeper or hidden meaning into the lyrics of the song? People want to know what the hidden meaning of Mr. Kite was. He explained in the Beatles biography. There wasn't any. I just did it. I shoved a lot of words together, then shoved some noise on. I just did it. I didn't dig that song when I wrote it. I didn't believe in it when I was doing it, but nobody will believe it. They don't want to. They want it to be important. He also changed it from Rochdale to Bishopsgate so that it rhymed with don't be late.
Through the ring, don't be late.
And on the poster too, it was Mr. Henderson that offered to challenge the world, not Mr. Kite.
In this way, Mr. K will challenge the world.
Now, the recording of Benefit of Mr. Kite is where things really get fun, because Lennon didn't just want to sing about a circus, he wanted the whole track to sound like one. He told George Martin that he wanted to smell sawdust on the floor. He wanted to really feel like he was at the circus with Mr. Kite and the Hendersons. Which sounds great, except George Martin had no idea what John actually meant. In terms of asking for particular interpretations, John Lennon was the least articulate George Martin remembered. John would deal in moods, he would deal in colours almost, and would never be specific about what instruments or what line I had. I would do that myself. He was more likely to say, it's a fairground sequence. I want to be in that circus atmosphere, so it was up to me to provide that. So they started work on February the 17th, 1967 in EMI Studio 2. Ringo set the scene with rolling drum fills and splashy hi-hat, while Paul thumped out a bass line that was half rock, half Calliope. George Harrison shook maracas, and George Martin himself wheezed away on a harmonium. Lennon sang the opening guide vocals, sometimes giving up mid-take just to dum-dum his way through the lyrics. On take one, you can amusingly hear John snap at engineer Jeff Emmerich for getting the name of the song wrong. Just have a listen.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, this is take one.
Being for the benefit.
But by take 4, they were getting somewhere. Lennon cracked jokes, Paul counted everyone in, and George Martin cheerily announced, "Okay men, the light's on." It was as much of a playground as a studio for them.
Benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline.
It did take quite a few tries to nail it down though, which caused problems for George Martin because the harmonium required pedalling to get air through its bellows, kinda like riding a bicycle. After playing this non-stop for many hours, he finally collapsed in exhaustion, sprawled out on the floor resembling a snow angel. This sight giving us all great amusement. But then came the tricky part. The sound effects. John wanted fairgrounds, steam organs, chaos, animals, and oh yeah, sawdust. So George Martin came up with a wild plan. Grab recordings of Victorian steam organs, chop the tapes into pieces, toss them in the air, and splice them back together again, randomly. Literally a sonic collage of carnival madness. Engineer Jeff Emmerich thought Martin had lost the plot, but he did it anyway, cutting up 60 bits of tape, throwing them around, taping them back together, backwards, upside down, sideways. The result was a swirling kaleidoscope mess of carousel music that sounded exactly like walking blindfolded through a fairground. However, while this was being done in the control room, things were getting a little bit tense out on the studio floor. Because they couldn't play and jam, Jeff Emmerich remembers, regarding the group's instruments being secured in another studio, the 4 Beatles were getting impatient with how long it was taking us to assemble the sounds. They were out in the studio area amusing themselves as best they could, but they kept popping into the control room saying, "Aren't you lot done yet?" At one point, John came in and he was actually quite aggravated, but Paul calmed him down, saying, "Look, it's a process and it just takes a certain amount of time. You have to expect that. Of course, the Beatles being the Beatles, they couldn't resist more overdubs. George Harrison puffed away on a giant bass harmonica, and Mal Evans, Neil Aspinall, and even Ringo joined in on mouth organs. Paul strapped on a Fender Esquire and delivered a guitar solo so drenched in reverb that it barely sounds like a guitar at all. Meanwhile, George Martin layered swirling organ runs, sometimes recording them at half speed so that when they played, they'd sound impossibly quick. And he even added in a glockenspiel at the end for a little bit of extra sparkle. The final result is a track that sounded like nothing else before, or maybe even since. Half Victorian Circus and half Psychedelic Daydream. Now, you'd think John would have been proud, but in true Lennon style, he shrugged it off. He said, "I didn't dig that song when I wrote it. I didn't believe in it." Yet, by 1980, in his final Playboy interview, his opinion had softened. He called it cosmically beautiful, like a pure watercolour. Which, to be honest, sounds about right. Structurally, Mr. Kite is unusual. No chorus, no bridge, and no refrain. Just verse after verse, 3 sung and 2 instrumental. It's like he stood on a street corner, cheerfully rolling out the list of acts on that night, trying to welcome in punters. It's one long rolling circus parade. The key drifts as well between C minor and D minor. Musically, each Beatle shines in their own way. John's vocal is theatrical and out otherworldly. Classic Lennon. Paul's bass line skips around, George's harmonica adds realism, and Ringo's the star for me. He becomes a full-on circus drummer, rolling and crashing at just the right moments, enveloping the song with his grooves. And then when Sgt. Pepper's dropped on June the 1st in 1967, Mr. Kite closed out side 1. It's nestled in between She's Leaving Home and With Him Without You. Critics at the time were dazzled by the album as a whole, though John's own modesty meant that he never really pushed Mr. Kite as a highlight of the record. Still, it's become one of the fan favourites of Sgt. Pepper's and a perfect example of the band's anything goes experimentation during that magical year. If the Beatles had been playing live, they probably never would have touched Mr. Kite. Imagine trying to recreate that exact sound on stage in 1967. It's impossible. But decades later, Paul McCartney decided to give it a go. On his Out There tour in 2013, he added Mr. Kite to his setlist for the first time ever. And I was lucky enough to see him perform this brilliant track at Glastonbury in 2022. Over the years, Mr. Kite has had a colourful afterlife. It popped up in the movie Across the Universe, in the Cirque du Soleil's Love Show, and in the infamous 1978 Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band film, where, bizarrely, George Burns sang it. And modern mixes have given it a new life too. In 2006, George Martin and his son Giles remixed it for Love, adding in horse sound effects, sinister laughter, and even mashing it up with Helter Skelter. By 2017, the 50th anniversary edition of Pepper gave fans pristine studio versions, plus early takes from the studio. And suddenly now you could hear John joking, Paul coaching him through the phrasing, and George Martin, probably funniest, puffing away on his harmonium until he nearly collapsed. So you probably want to ask, what's the legacy of being for the benefit of Mr. Kite? Why is it even worth making a video about? Well, it's a song that started out as a dusty old poster in an antique shop and ended up as one of the most surreal, brilliantly amusing moments on one of the most famous albums of all time. And it's a sign that you can really turn anything into a song if you're creative and talented enough. It's so very Beatles and an important John Lennon song for Sgt. Pepper's. Even when John was dismissive, the rest of us couldn't help but be enchanted. It might not have meant much to him at the time, but to generations of fans, Mr. Kite is a trip to the fairground that never gets old. So next time that you're on your lunch break, maybe don't scroll TikTok or Twitter. You never know. Your own masterpiece might be hiding right around the corner. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the show is over. Henry the Horse has danced his final waltz, the Hendersons have taken their bow, and Mr. Kite has once again challenged the world. Thanks very much for watching, as always, you rock and rollers. We're a dying breed, aren't we? So let's stick together. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. And if you want a video requesting, let me know what you think down in the comments below. The best one, and I will do it. Thanks very much for watching, as always, and I will see you again.